Howdy, folks. This is George Finney, and this is the final of the Nine Cybersecurity Habits Masterclass. The theme this week is deception, and every week we've got kind of a take on it. But the week this week is about know thy enemy, and one of the things we'll kind of talk about is through deception we've been able to get to know how our adversaries work, how they think, what they're after, and deception is really the habit that I think can make the difference in disrupting malicious activity, toward you as a person, in your communities, or to your companies. And so making deception a habit this is probably the most difficult of the 9 habits to master, but it's also kind of the coolest. And so with this, the exemplar, the person who I think of when I think of deception is actually this person. So this is by far and away my favorite story in all of cybersecurity ever. It's not even a close second, and never will be a second as far as I'm concerned. But this is actually Dr. Clifford Stowell. So Dr. Stowell wasn't a cybersecurity practitioner like the picture might lead you to believe. He was actually an astronomer. And so he was helping design the next generation of telescopes. And the way that new telescopes are being made, instead of having one giant lens to kind of take all the optics and focus it down, they figured out that they could use a bunch of smaller, less expensive lenses and use computers to kind of stitch the images back together. And so he was helping build the first of these, which is the Keck Observatory in Hawaii. And so really coordinating all of those mirrors and figuring out how to combine the images required a lot of sophisticated computer programming. And so this again is the 1980s. Stoll was in his mid-30s at the time, and his grant funding ran out for him to be able to contribute to the project. And so he needed a job. He was working, the research lab was based out of UC Berkeley at that point, and the IT department had an open position. And so they brought him in to help work in a computer lab. But his first task was literally to figure out the computer lab's accounting system, because it had showed a 75-cent error in the monthly report. And it's kind of a menial task. Everybody thought it was just a rounding error or some problem with the software. The software had been developed by student interns over the course of 10 different years. Lots of different people collaborated on it. No documentation. He just had to kind of go figure it out. And so his personality was such that he started, obsessing about it. He was sleeping in the computer labs every night, much to his girlfriend's dismay. And it turned out that the culprit wasn't a rounding error at all, or a problem with the software that had been written. It was actually a German hacker, I'm not making this up, working for the Russian government. So Dr. Clifford Stowell, the astronomer, was really the first case in the history where someone had caught someone in the act of hacking. So what he did is he would actually wait for the hacker to dial in with a modem, and then he'd watch what the guy did. And so he figured out what he was after. He got a bunch of old computers from around the university, set up kind of a fake network, and let the bad guy get access. He set up fake documents, and he eventually figured out that he was after government secrets, classified research. But at the time, again, this is the first time that anybody's ever caught a hacker in the act. Nobody cared. He really had a hard time getting the FBI to investigate until he was able to really show what the bad guy was after. And so eventually he did get them to work on it. He worked with the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, and the Air Force to track down the hacker again, who was based out of Germany, and they made arrests, and it was amazing. So he wrote a book about the experience. He kept incredibly detailed notes. The book, if for your reference, is called The Cuckoo's Egg. It's one of the most fascinating books ever. And I remember hearing the story growing up, right? This is, 1989, 1990. It was such a big deal that PBS, they had Nova. If you ever remember watching Nova, they did a Nova special on Clifford Stowell. And his only condition for making the TV show was that he would have the whole thing made as a recreation of actual events. And all of his friends and coworkers got to play themselves on the TV series. And the show, it's actually free on YouTube. You can watch it. It's called The KGB, The Computer, and Me. So I guess, being a bad boyfriend, he was actually able to get his girlfriend on TV, which maybe made up for things. I don't really know. But this idea of knowing thy enemy through deception is really important. So a few years later, in the late 90s, there was a project called the HoneyNet Project, where folks from around the cybersecurity community were figuring things out, and they stood up these independent honeypot labs, and they would see what attackers would do. They would see the techniques they were using. They would see the data they were after, and then they would share that information with all the members of the HoneyNet project. And they actually created the series of fantastic documents that are still really valuable today. And they're called the Know Thy Enemy series from the HoneyNet project. So Clifford Stowell was really the first to apply deception in a computing environment, but he wasn't obviously the first person to ever do deception. So about 2,000 years ago, Sun Tzu wrote, all warfare is based on deception. And so, you have to understand deception, in order to really be effective at protecting yourselves. But Machiavelli also said, and weighed in on deception, and he said, never win by force what can be won by deception, right? And the idea is, deception actually is much easier in terms of reaching your objectives than force. Going back even further, probably the most famous case of deception is the Trojan horse. This isn't the actual Trojan horse. It's obviously a replica that's actually in Greece. But the Trojan horse was really what everybody thinks of as the greatest deception in history. The Trojan War itself, believed to be waged between 1260 and 1180 BC. So we're really talking 3,000 or so years ago. And just history lesson, the war was believed to have gone on for about 10 years and was essentially a stalemate between the two sides. And so you figure the lifespan for a Greek person at the time, 3,000 years ago, was about 30, 35 years. And so, these warriors who were probably, in their teens when they started, they had been fighting for all of their adult lives. And frankly, they wanted to go home. But there was this argument. They felt like deception was dishonorable. Would should they do it? Would that be okay? And they didn't want to lose face. They didn't want to walk away empty-handed. And so they made this decision to build the Trojan horse, and eventually that they won the war. But deception is also kind of hits close to home. So in the beginning of the Civil War, the Union had suffered a lot of setbacks. They almost lost Washington, D.C. To Confederate troops. And so at the time, Abraham Lincoln's son, he had just passed away. It was devastating to the president. And they were looking they're really looking bad. And so the general in chief of all of the Union armies, his name was George McClellan, he was really reluctant to send his troops into battle. They had a lot of troops at the time, but the Confederate Army's secret weapon was deception. So the kind of the scouts, the spies that McClellan had sent estimated the Confederate forces to be around 100,000 to 150,000 troops. But actually, looking back, historians believe that the Confederate Army really only had about 50,000 or fewer troops, and it was extremely vulnerable during this period. The Confederate Army, they had a shortage of artillery and troops to be in the right position to fend off a northern invasion. And so what the Confederates did, they carved wooden logs. And you can see that in the picture here. Those aren't cannons. Those are literally just trees that they had cut and placed in positions that looked like cannons. And so the event became known as the Quaker Gun Affair. And again, historians look back and they believe that if General McClellan had marched on the Confederate troops at any time in the months leading up to Lincoln actually forcing him to move the troops, he would have been able to walk directly into Richmond, Virginia, seize the Confederate capital before General Lee had ever had time to gather his troops and reinforce the city. So McClellan was relieved from his duty and placed in charge of a smaller, tiny part of the army. He remained deceived throughout the war. Right, he failed to fully defeat General Lee at the Battle of Antietam, allowing General Lee to retreat again. And again, he was always the Union Army was always bigger than the Confederate Army, but they believed that it wasn't. And so, thinking back history-wise, the Civil War might have ended years earlier, saving thousands of lives, if not for this technique of deception. And again, the wooden logs that the Confederate troops used in the Quaker Gun Affair, they were free and they were plentiful. Just like the wood that was used to build the Confederate the Trojan horse was plentiful. There was just wood that they had lying around at the time. It really only took a few days. I've read to really build the Trojan horse, and so deception, again, very, very easy to implement. Free. It doesn't cost you anything necessarily. It gets you so much in terms of advantage and insight into who your enemy is and what they're thinking. But I will say, before we move on too much further, that there is a cost to deception. People don't like being deceived, and also people don't like deceiving other people. And so it's time to play Wheel of Fortune. So you don't have to. You can say it out loud if you'd like, but think about what these words might be. So there's this the psychology study, and they've called this effect the Lady Macbeth effect, or just the Macbeth effect. But Lady Macbeth, she was famous for going and trying to wash her hands, and she couldn't get the blood off. But really, it's about this effect is about priming. So what the psychologists did before the study is that they prime their subjects to either think about really good things or really bad things. And so, in one experiment, they thought the words, if they had lied, or if they thought of bad things, they read the words as wash or shower or soap. Again, thinking that there's this cleaning cue related to shame. Whereas people who thought of good things thought of different words. And so this priming effect, I think, is really interesting because it shows that our brains are primed. So when we're thinking of deception, there is a downside. There's an effect on us. And in another, I'm sorry, the ones that were primed with a positive effect, they were more likely to think of the other alternatives to these words, like wish, or shaker, or stop. There's also a similar study, it's called cognitive choice supportive bias. And again, it's localized, so that people who were asked to lie verbally preferred an oral cleaning product like toothbrush or mouthwash. But those who were asked to lie in writing preferred to wash their hands, which is a really interesting effect. So, when you think about, deception, you have to take that into account. Your brain is primed in a certain way. And we do see deception as a negative thing, but it doesn't have to be that way. So you might have read the story Hansel and Gretel. And so there's this, concept of breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs can kind of be used to lead an adversary down a fake trail. Athletes do this all the time, where they juke and move, right? So I think of like Barry Sanders, just simply moving his head, a certain way, and his opponent would just fall over, or like Allen Iverson, very, very similar. So the idea is that deception really takes preparation. You have to know that you're going to be deceptive in order to be prepared to be deceptive. We do this at SMU. So fascinating. So if you're a parent sending your children to school, you really want to know what their grades are. However, the privacy laws say that we can't tell parents what their students' grades are unless the student has signed off on that. And so we get parents calling in to the university all the time, pretending to be the student. And so we have to ask them trick questions. So we'll say, what class are you taking at 3 p.m. on a Thursday? And they might not be taking a class at 3 p.m. on a Thursday, and the parent isn't in a position to know that, whereas the student would. And so our folks have to incorporate that into their training. Just like, athletes prepare and practice their moves. And so breadcrumbs are one, like a fake trail, but there are also other things like decoys, watermarks, beacons, lures, right? All of those are designed to be deceptive in slightly different ways. And the idea is to, similar to the police, right? That, they'll selectively leak clues about a case to the press in order to defend against imposters coming in and giving them bad leads, or pretending to be the suspect when they're not actually the suspect. And so this idea of watermarking is also really interesting. We mentioned the police giving fake information, but some companies will place fake records in databases or like a phone book to identify when their customer lists have been leaked, right? So that's a great way of figuring out, oh, well, you actually used our data to create your fake list. And there might be a fake phone number listing. So if that phone number gets called, well, you can kind of know where that source is. Film companies do the same thing. They include tiny watermarks inside screening copies of their movies or TV shows. And this is separate from all the digital rights management software that they might also use to protect the media. But again, if that movie leaks online, they can fast forward to that one part of the thing that contains the watermark to find specifically who leaked the film online. And they're really protective of that. They don't like that. So practicing a handful of deceptive techniques, decoys, breadcrumbs, watermarks, lures, beacons, can help you protect yourself and your communities when really no other security habit can do that job. And so the best at this was this guy. You might guess that this is Houdini. But the really important thing to remember about deception when it's being used for your defense is that attackers have to assume that you're telling the truth. And so, well, that's interesting. We mentioned the conversation about a student, their parents calling in, but what we're really doing is we're creating a story. And everything about that story that you create has to be consistent and believable. You have to be prepared beforehand. So the example I use is, if you're going to tell someone at work that you watched a TV show, you need to know what actors were in it. You need to know generally what it's about. And you'd think about that if you were going to lie and make up a TV show, what questions would you expect them to ask you about that TV show? And you've got to be prepared for those things. So with Houdini, if he had just broken out of his chains in seconds, he wouldn't really be believed to be the greatest magician of all time. And he was probably a very good lockpicker and a safecracker. But those, aren't necessarily deceptive skills. It was really his stories. So, in one case, he's diverting attention away from what he's actually doing. He actually broke a pair of handcuffs that were handcrafted, and they took 5 years to make. The key was like 6 inches long. You couldn't conceal the key. And so what he did is his escape, it took an hour long. It looked like he wasn't going to make it. There was this whole drama. And in terms of neuroscience, it's really the audience's stress response that created the ability to have him do deception. So, it was the audience's mirror neurons, like we talked about in chapter 8. Those mirror neurons were going crazy because is he going to drown in the water, or is he going to get crushed by the giant spikes? And so those emotions short circuit any vigilance or skepticism habits that the audience might have had to figure out the trick. So in other words, deception hijacks the brain using emotion. So just like SMU student advisors are prepared beforehand to trick helicopter parents, Houdini knew what his performance was going to be, and he had that emotional element built in. That story, that narrative that he crafted as a part of that was a really tricky part of what it means to be deceptive. So this is the last in the 9 cybersecurity habits, and one final reminder that security is in your DNA, right? It's built into who we are and how we operate. And so, what are the habits? What are the prompts? So again, I think as I've looked at this, the prompts about deception are really about being prepared. And deception really happens at the beginning of things, not necessarily at the end of things. So the prompts here really tend to focus on the beginning. And so some of the habits, I love the idea of code words. So when I was in school, one of my best friends, his girlfriend wanted to eavesdrop on our conversations. We had 3-way phone calls, and so she would be dialed in, and he'd dial me in afterwards and pretend that like he was just talking to me for the first time. And we'd work this out in advance. He knew that his girlfriend wanted to figure out what girl I liked or whatever, and so we had a code word, and we said, okay, well, if we ever ask, hey, are you going to go skateboarding tomorrow? That would mean that someone else was on the line eavesdropping. And it worked because, well, we didn't care if we were going to go skateboarding tomorrow. If we really wanted to go skateboarding, we were going to talk about it right then. So code words worked really well for us. If you were setting up password challenge questions, the password challenge question is really important to use deception, right? So if I can look up, who your third cousin's aunt is on social media, well, that's not a really great challenge question. If you answer instead, my favorite animal is the calculus. Well, it's nonsense, right? There's no way that anyone would ever be able to guess that. Sometimes you might use a fake voice. If in college, when I picked up the phone, I would always say, Domino's Pizza, and that threw somebody off, right? So if they weren't expecting, to talk to the weird, George guy, then they would move on, and it wouldn't be, I wouldn't get a telemarketing call or whatever. But really, it's all about being prepared. So a couple of recipes again, be prepared, and I think that'll go a long way. And again, just the review, we've gone through 9 cybersecurity habits. So literacy, skepticism, vigilance, secrecy, culture, diligence, community, mirroring, and deception. I think the first 4 really represent the things inside you that you can do internally, and the last 5 are things that we do together with other people. And by far, I think if you had to only have one cybersecurity habit, really number 7, community, is what you should focus on, because you might not be good at any of the other habits, but if you can bring someone together, a mentor, a cybersecurity guru, or just other people to know what they've done in the past, if they've been impacted by a cybersecurity incident, that can help get you a long way of the way. So remember, you're not alone. Security is in your DNA. And again, feel free to reach out with questions. I'm available on Twitter or LinkedIn. If you haven't connected, please do. And we look forward to engaging with you more. I'll be starting a podcast tomorrow about Well Aware, and having conversations with other cybersecurity leaders and other leaders outside of cybersecurity as well, because security really isn't just about the technology. It's about everyone. And again, the other thing that I think is really important about Well Aware is that anyone can be can be successful at cybersecurity. You don't have to be a technologist or a firewall guru to help make a difference in cybersecurity. A lot of the folks that I talk about in the book, like Dr. Clifford Stowell, or like Sylvia Acevedo, who's the CEO of the Girl Scouts, have made a difference and played a huge role in cybersecurity, and have helped make a difference. And I think you can too. So with that, thank you for being a part of this.